Hey do-it-yourselfers, it's finally here. The day when we put this timing belt and all the rest of the timing belt components back on this 2.7 liter bi-turbo Audi engine. And if after we put everything back together, the car runs, you might even see me do a little dance. Alright, so in the previous video I showed you how you can put your camshaft chain tensioner, your camshaft seal, and your valve cover gaskets on both sides of this engine. And in the video before that, I showed you how you can set this tool to remove your timing belts and all of its components. So now that it's time to put our timing belts and all its components back on, first thing we're going to do is to remove these camshaft bolts. I only hand tighten these when I put these back on, so they're fairly easy to remove, as you can see. Next we'll remove our special tool, and these end caps, looks like they might come with it. Next it's time to put our thermostat back on. Dab your finger in some clean coolant, put it on the gasket, and also make sure that this valve, this bleeder valve, is in the 12 o'clock position when you install it. So this goes in like this. Next we'll grab our thermostat housing and make sure we thoroughly clean this area. And next we'll install our thermostat housing. Next we'll torque him down, and the torque spec for these is 7 foot-pounds, but since I'm using an extension, I'm going to torque it down to 9 foot-pounds. 1. That's 2. Now before we install this coolant hose that goes at the end of this thermostat housing, we're going to grab our water pump and put tiny amounts of RTV silicone on the outer edges where the bolts go. And next we'll grab our gasket, install it on our water pump, and this RTV is going to allow this to stay in place when it's time to put the water pump on the engine. Alright, so just got this hose back on here. That little clamp that goes on there is going to be a pain in the butt to put in. So now we'll put this end back on the thermostat housing, then get our clamp back on. Next we'll need to thoroughly clean the mating surface of our water pump. Now we got pretty lucky with this. There's hardly any old material from the old gasket here. Use razor blades if you have to, and some brake clean, and you should be able to get the job done. Next we'll grab our water pump with the gasket attached to it, put one bolt through and hold it with our extension. Then we have to get our power steering pump out of the way, and then hand tighten this bolt. Next we put in one of the lower ones so that the gasket doesn't get a chance to move around. We'll put in the rest of them, and there's 9 total. Now, by the way, if you're wondering what brand of water pump or any other parts I'm going to be using on this job, I'll put links to all the tools and products I use in this video down below in the description box, so you can click on them and check them out yourself. And next we'll torque these down. The factory torque specification is 7 foot-pounds, but I'm going to go to 9 foot-pounds since I'm using an extension on this torque wrench. Next we'll put on our driver's side rear timing belt cover. And this is held in by 3 bolts and 1 nut. And next we'll install our oil dipstick tube like this. And then there's another nut that holds this in. And then we'll install our passenger side rear timing belt cover as well. And this one's held in by 3 bolts. Alright, next we're going to remove our crankshaft seal. And the way this tool works is that you slip this end underneath the seal. It has a hook that hooks onto the seal, and then you line up this with the engine. And then in theory, you should be able to pop this seal out. Let's improvise. I think it's coming out. That's it. So it kind of worked. This goes in like this between your crankshaft and the seal. And then when you put this on the engine, you can pivot off of that and pull it out, but just didn't have enough space down there. So I don't know if you guys saw, but I put this on like this, then use the screwdriver at the end of here between this at the tip of the crankshaft, then pry it out. And as you can see, we did not scratch our crankshaft, which is kind of important. Next we'll grab our new crankshaft seal, put some oil on the outside and on the inside of it. First line it up by hand, and then get a socket that's large enough to go around this crankshaft, and then with the help of a hammer or a mallet, gently start tapping this in. So here's how you want it to look like, nice and flush all the way around. And next we're going to reinstall our crankshaft gear, and remember you're going to have to line this up with your crankshaft, and this can go on there only one way. There we go. Next it's time for the crankshaft bolt, but you cannot reuse these as these are torque to yield. So you're gonna go buy a new one. I got this from the dealer for 20 bucks. So we're gonna screw this on here, and remember you only need to remove this crankshaft bolt if you're replacing the crankshaft seal. If you're not gonna be replacing the crankshaft seal, just don't touch this. And we're going to need to torque this down in 2 steps. First step is to torque it down to 147 foot-pounds. There we go. And in the next step, we're going to need to turn this bolt another 180 degrees. So what I'm going to do is to actually just put a mark on the side of the bolt, start twisting this, and then when this mark is exactly on the other side, that will be just about 180 degrees. And similar to the way we took it off, we're going to use some good old torque for this. Next, we remove our camshaft bolts and these end caps, and then put our camshaft sprockets back on and reinstall these camshaft bolts and this end cap. But we're not going to torque them down, we're just going to hand tighten so that these sprockets can still move. Yeah, try to tighten this down by hand as much as you can, otherwise this can still move. And of course the same thing on the driver's side. Next we'll install our idler pulley, which goes right here and gets torqued down to 40 foot-pounds. Next we'll install this tensioner with this pin in place. And as you may remember, 3 bolts hold this in. And these get torqued down to 10 foot-pounds. Next up, this tensioner pivot arm. And this obviously goes right above our tensioner. And it's important that you clean or replace the washers or replace this whole pivot arm if it shows signs of corrosion. And this one gets torqued down to 15 foot-pounds. Just make sure after you torque it down that this can pivot freely. Next we'll install our tensioning roller, which I'm glad to see comes with its own washers. And this is where it's going to go on that pivot arm in the back. So make sure you install this correctly. You point this all the way down and then you run in your bolt. And as you can see, as tension is applied to this pivot arm, it puts more tension on this pulley. And this gets torqued down to 20 foot-pounds. Next, we come up top and reinstall our camshaft timing tool. And you can run these down a little bit more. All right, here's something I forgot. Don't forget to put some blue thread locker on these. So next, before we put our timing belt on, you want to go around and make sure all the pulleys can move freely. So here's our water pump, our idler pulley, and our tensioning roller. So now we put our timing belt on, and this should go pretty easy with these sprockets spinning freely. So we just start at your crankshaft. It is super important that it's fully engaged all around your crankshaft gear and it does not move, okay? So around the crankshaft, around the roller, you guys probably gonna have a hard time seeing this, but up here around our driver's side camshaft sprocket, and down here underneath the water pump pulley, and then to the passenger side camshaft sprocket, we can move this back and forth to make installation easy. And once it's over that, we can pull on this and put this around our tensioning roller. And actually, even with these sprockets being loose, it's kind of tough putting this back on here. If this turns out to be the case, it's no sweat. We're just going to remove our tensioner. And this will allow for enough slack so that we can put this on our tensioning roller, like this. Now, putting the tensioner back on is a little bit tricky. Just to be safe, what you can do is to get an Allen socket on this tensioner, turn it counterclockwise. This applies more tension to the belt, but this way you can push this pivot arm up, create enough space so that when you put in the tensioner itself, you don't run the risk of damaging the threads by accident. All right, next we'll torque down our camshaft sprockets, and these are torqued down to 41 foot-pounds. So there's the passenger side and the driver's side. All right, next we'll remove our camshaft tool. And next, in order to be able to remove this grenade pin, we get our hex socket with our wrench back on this tensioning roller, turn it clockwise ever so slightly until we can easily remove this pin. And then to pre-tension this belt, all you have to do is to turn this counterclockwise just a little bit. Well, the book says to by 11 foot-pounds, but you can kind of just turn it counterclockwise until you feel some tension, and that should be plenty. This is just to remove slack for the initial startup. And next we're gonna have to dive underneath the car and remove our crankshaft timing tool, this guy right here. And then we put this cap back on. Help me, Donald Trump. I need your dumb tiny hands. And we come back up top, and now we're going to turn our crankshaft 2 full rotations clockwise, and that equals 1 full rotation of the camshaft sprockets. And after that, we're going to put our timing tool back on the camshafts, and if it goes in smoothly, then we obviously are in time. Now this might be a little redundant if you're using both the camshaft and the crankshaft timing tools, but it's better safe than sorry. But also this will tell you whether you have 6 compression cycles as you're turning this for the 2 full rotations of the crankshaft. You're gonna feel the compression of each cylinder in your wrench. So go ahead and put a mark on your crankshaft gear and on the engine so you can line them back up. So there's 1 compression, 2, and we're back up top, and I felt 6 compressions, which is good because we have 6 cylinders. So we make sure our timing marks are aligned. Then we grab our timing tool, and this should go back on with very little adjusting or effort. All right, so the rest of the things that need to go back on this engine are going to be pretty self-explanatory and pretty much the reversal of removal. So I won't bore you with those steps, so I'm just going to put everything back on myself here and then cut to on how I'm going to actually go ahead and prep this engine and then start this engine in the next segment. All right, so we got some coolant in our system and also all the air hoses and coolant hoses that we would need to install in order to start this engine. But as it's normal with any big job, we got a bunch of extra bolts and nuts. Those dumb engineers, they don't know what the hell they're doing. All right, so the best way to start this engine, since all our lifters and our camshaft chain tensioners are empty of oil, is to remove the fuel pump fuse, should be this guy here, and then crank the engine in 5 to 10 second intervals, waiting about 30 seconds between each set. But as you can see, I have a dead battery here, so I don't know how I can do this, but we're gonna give it a try. So yeah, you do that 4 or 5 times, then put the fuel pump fuse back in, and now it should start. Of course, we have all sorts of lifter noise and camshaft chain tensioner noise, but that's normal because, you know, they're not filled with oil yet. So now I'm gonna just turn it off because I don't have enough oil in the system, coolant in the system yet. And I think I promised you guys a dance. About goddamn time. I didn't say how I was gonna dance. And there you have it. We're in running condition. All I have to do is to put a couple of things back on this and we can take this for a spin. But until then, do me a huge favor and check out my other videos, which I'll put links to on this side of the screen. There will also be links down below in the description box as well. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.